Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is February 17th, 2016. Another exciting day on planet Earth unfolds. And the latest mystery in the ongoing mystery of how things work on planet Earth is the death of Supreme Court Justice Anton Scalia, who died under, you really have to say, mysterious circumstances. What are the chances that he would die while visiting a ranch in Texas? And Texas, as we know, is sort of the home of Spook Central, you know, the black op world, starting from the assassination of JFK. But apparently he had a pillow over his head. That's how he was found, lying on his back in the bed with a pillow over his head. And somebody mentioned that if this were a murder, then this would be like a calling card from the murderer. It would be a slap in the face, a warning that this is what happens to people we don't like. They die. And the pillow over the head is just like a signature or calling card to show that he was in fact murdered. And now you could say, oh, well, maybe he always sleeps with a pillow over his head. Yeah. Or maybe he did die of natural causes, or maybe he did die from a heart attack. Well, the thing about it is that no one will ever know what he really died from, because no one got to, of any medical expertise, really got to look at his body. No autopsy was made, and he was immediately embalmed, so they couldn't tell if anything unusual was going on with his blood. Like, for instance, somebody injected him with something. Now, we know, of course, that the CIA has a gun, and this gun was invented in the 60s, so they definitely have it, and they probably have a lot more sophisticated things than that even. And what it does is an ice dart. It shoots an ice dart, and the dart and the ice melts. It shoots in the body. It's like a sliver of ice. It shoots into the body and then melts and disappears, but it causes a heart attack. It simulates a heart attack. And so they have the capability, they have the technology. Now, he may have just been smothered. Maybe 2 or 3 guys got on him and smothered him. Amazingly, he was at the ranch without a security detail, which apparently he always has, and yet they persuaded him that there was no problem. He was safe enough there. The guy who runs the ranch down in Texas is a donor to Obama, very high level, has a lot of CIA connections, spook connections in that underworld, that black, dark world of spies. Poindexter, named John Poindexter. There are photographs of him speaking with Obama, meeting with Obama. And so this strange way in which he is hurriedly dealt with, the corpse is dealt with, and no investigation. Now, this happened after 9/11. The Bush administration absolutely delayed on any kind of investigation about 9/11. Can you imagine a crime as big as 9/11 going with zero investigation for that long? It was like a year and a half. And it was only, the investigation was only convened, which eventually came out with the 9/11 report, after the families of the deceased, 3,000 people killed on 9/11. But the families would not give up. And this is a problem with families. They will not, when their loved ones are killed, they want to find out what really happened. And who is to blame. And what were the failings. And nobody in the administration wanted to deal with that. They delayed it. This is unheard of, in a situation like this. What do they have to hide? What does the people in charge of the body of Anton Scalia have to hide? And they have control of that body. It's not in the hands of his family. It is going to be displayed in the Supreme Court. He's going to be laid out where people can see him dead, lying there dead. According to the reports that I've heard, the very first thing that John Poindexter did when he found Scalia's body was call Obama and tell him. Not the police, not the medical, not the the EMT. No, they should have got the medical people in there first. Maybe he's not dead, but he's dead. Call the president. So, this is really a big deal because now you have the situation in which the major obstacle toward the success of the Obama administration's agenda has now been removed. And that means that in the last months of his administration, that a lot of things can happen. That would be climate change policies, very draconian, to cut back on electrical power plants, coal-fired power plants, just to shut down the economy more and more and more and more. And rely on renewables, which is great if it can happen, if they can meet our energy needs. They want we know what they want. They want people to use less energy. And it is true that Americans are incredibly wasteful, but it's going to cause suffering for people, but they say, hey, it's worth it. If we're going to save the planet, we've got to suffer. That means no air conditioning, not as much heat in the winter. You're not going to be able to drive as much. You're just going to have to hunker down. Meanwhile, the main polluters will just simply, they'll have the tight regulations, but they can move their highly polluting manufacturing facilities offshore to China, Vietnam, and all kinds of other third world countries that don't have any regulations at all. So it's really not about saving the environment at all. It's really about shutting down the American economy, creating a major amount of suffering among the American people, because the big goal is to destroy the American democracy. The New World Order cannot succeed without the destruction of the American Republic and to be replaced by something else, which would be a top-down command and control structure, like other like China or something like that. This is what a lot of people want. So we'll see how this all goes, but it's another exciting day, a new mystery, It's more fun than a barrel of monkeys, folks. And I want to play for you a approximately 9-minute clip of Alex Jones interviewing Michael Madsen. Wayne Madsen. He's a highly respected journalist. He always has a lot of good things to say, and I think he's very, very well informed. So let's listen to that clip, and then I'll talk about it, and we'll see how it goes.
Wayne, the Russia situation, and I'm going to cover this after you're gone and show the articles for viewers and listeners, but it's Medvedev, as you know, last week saying, look out, this can cause a wider war, a permanent war, a nuclear war, world leaders admitting it, Saudi Arabia announcing ground troops, all of this, the CIA saying prepare for imminent ISIS attacks in America. I mean, this is the group they funded. Where is all this going geopolitically, Wayne?
It's getting very serious. There's a report now that appeared in several news outlets that Turkish troops are now in Ukraine on the Ukrainian-Crimean border. Crimea, that former part of Ukraine that Russia took back. It was retroceded back to Russia. And so we've got Turkish troops in Ukraine. We've got the United Arab Emirates sending also troops to Turkey, along with the Saudis sending troops.
And Turkey's shelling heavily the Syrian government.
Yeah, and the UAE doesn't have much in the way of an army. They have foreign mercenaries that are actually led by Eric Prince, the former head of Blackwater. There's former U.S. Special Forces troops commanding these Colombians and South Africans.
Let me be clear, because you never go, you're not half-cocked. You're saying former Blackwater XZ, or whatever the name is this week, is actually going in as Merc forces. We know they've hired them, but and is actually fighting on the side of ISIS.
They're fighting in Yemen on the side of the Saudis, and it's well known that the Saudis support ISIS. And now they're going into Incirlik, which is the NATO base, where all these Saudi planes and troops are going with the Emirate troops. And the Emirates are basically foreign mercenaries working for Prince's new company called Reflex Response, or R2, which sounds an awful lot like R2P, Responsibility to Protect, that Hillary and Samantha Power and Susan Rice came up with, that got us into this mess to begin with. And here's the issue. The U.S. also has special forces in fighting for the Syrian Kurds and the Iraqi Kurds. And we could have a situation where retired special forces working for Prince and the UAE government will be shooting at current special forces troops in Syria, fighting on behalf of the Syrian Kurds against ISIS. And
hold on. I got Paul Watson coming up, but you always, I'm not just saying this, folks. This guy is so accurate. This guy is just basically never wrong. Stay there. I didn't understand that part. I mean, I knew our special forces get really mad when they have to deliver weapons to Al-Qaeda or ISIS and they threaten them, but you're saying that there are Blackwater cheap dip troops that we're in the position to be fighting U.S. forces that are finally fighting Al-Qaeda because of congressional heat. Wow. You talk about a synthesis of evil, a full spectrum evil. Stay there, Wayne. 2 more minutes. How would you say things are going for the Anglo-American power arm versus the Russian and Chinese power arm? And what else are you watching? What else do you expect to pop?
Well, I mentioned earlier this situation with Ukraine allowing Turks to come into their country. The Ukrainian government is a foreign, Soros-operated government anyway. It's corrupt. And we just had the first ever meeting between a patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church and the pontiff of the Roman Catholic Church in Havana. That never happened before. And I'm sure what they discussed is if these two individuals come to an agreement, and they can basically tell both sides in the Ukraine situation, back down, get rid of that phony government in Kiev.
That's right. What does that signify? For the first time in 2,000 years, these two original churches, you can argue who's older, meet for the first time It's because it's saying, is Europe going to go to war with Russia? That's who, obviously, the PANF represents, and the EU. In fact, I meant to cover that. You were absolutely right. Elaborate on that, sir. That is so huge. That shows us how close we are to World War III, and these institutions realize this. Was this not really a meeting of Russia with the Vatican?
Yeah, basically that's what it was. And what we see now, that the Russian Orthodox Church, which really can speak for a number of other Orthodox churches in the area, in the Middle East and in Georgia and Ukraine and elsewhere, they're in a position now, the Pope and the Patriarch, to tell the Ukrainians, look, you're with us, and if you want to keep playing with ISIS, that government's not going to be around, because if we put the word out to our people in Ukraine, they're going to be dragging people like Yatsenyuk out and hang them up.
So that shows how deadly this battle is, this battle of five armies now that you see unprecedented.
Well, the Wahhabis, right, the Wahhabis are talking about a new crusade, and when you see the Pope and the Patriarch meet for the first time, maybe they're saying, okay, you want a crusade? You're going to get your crusade. And Erdogan keeps supporting these guys, these ISIS guys, and he's made this concordat with the Wahhabis that run Saudi Arabia. If I were Erdogan, I'd be looking at maintaining control over what was Constantinople and was the headquarters of the Orthodox
of the Byzantine.
And, yeah, the Greeks have wanted that holy church, the Hagia Sophia, back forever, and now Erdogan says he's going to turn it back into a working mosque. I think we're on the verge of a major second crusade, and meanwhile, Obama goes to his first mosque ever as president in Baltimore, and it's a mosque affiliated with the Saudi Wahhabis.
That's what I want to say. I've got electrical chills all over my body. I've never had this in my life. Okay, I mean, I've walked out of a thing and a mugger with a butcher knife came at me, and I didn't have this much electricity in me. I can feel the epic shifting. It's so historical. It's so beyond an X-Files episode. I don't know how the average person isn't completely freaked out. Now finish up with this point. Looking at this, what does it signify that Prince's new group, and I actually have seen that, I'd forgotten to cover it, is involved in different parts of the Middle East at loggerheads with other factions in our government actually fighting ISIS, and also in Ukraine, to end up having mercenaries formerly from the U.S. and taken from the U.S. battling U.S. troops. I mean, are they that dishonorable that they'll actually do that? Or is there a level that these mercenaries or Eric Prince might actually stop their behavior at?
Under John Brennan, the CIA has become an active ally of ISIS, the Saudis, and the Turks. He's a Saudi file. Of course,
the word is he converted. He converted to Islam. I mean, that's pretty much been confirmed.
Yeah, and I can almost believe that. So here we have his, and look, it was Prince was tied up with the CIA when he was running Blackwater, and they were, and Brennan was one of the architects of the torture and rendition program that Blackwater was intimately involved in. So here we have the active special forces still under the control of the Pentagon, possibly getting into a ground war in Syria with these R2 people coming in from Abu Dhabi.
Well, I'll tell you, Prince is one arrogant person who thinks he's going to get away with that.
Absolutely, and he's also affiliated with the Opus Dei movement. So, this is a little bit of Tom Clancy, Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code, and you mentioned X-Files. Throw it all in together, and that's what you got right here, just a big mess.
That was very interesting. What I find most interesting about it is with Wayne Madsen, he gives so many details that it's really hard not to believe him, that he's accurate. And I've found this to be true over and over. He really digs into the story and gets the real story. And most Americans don't understand that when the President of the United States says we are pulling our troops out of a country like Afghanistan or Iraq or any other country that America is militarily involved in, that does not include private contractor mercenaries like the Blackwater Group and others that are nevertheless paid for by the American people. But they are becoming more and more the preferred tool of policy, of foreign policy, the foreign policy agenda by the elites, because they are essentially out of the radar, they're below the radar, they are not under the rules of war, the accountability that is necessary for U.S. military forces to be under the watchdog, the eyes of the Congress, and they are essentially above the law. They can do anything they want. They can kill, maim, rape, torture, run ravage, just rob, steal, whatever, and this makes them essentially a terrorist force. This makes them, in name only, a terrorist, in everything but name only, a terrorist force by a proxy guerrilla force or asymmetrical force, and you would find that the politicians and many of the military men say, well, we need these people to enforce policy, and especially when the American people do not go along with our policy and do not give us the green light to continue with a particular policy in a particular country. This is a way that we can get around the wishes of the American people. And you might say, well, wait a minute, don't the American people run the government? Well, yes and no. The founders of this country did not entirely trust the will of the people, and that's why they set up various buffers like the Electoral College, which in fact could negate the will of the American people if they felt that the vote was not putting a person into office that would be beneficial for the American people, or maybe just for themselves. I don't know, but it is true that more than once in American history, the Electoral College has put a president into office when he lost the popular vote. And, you know, but the shenanigans have been going on since the beginning. You know, the illegal activity, the stolen votes, the changed votes, the intimidation of people so that they're too afraid to vote or they're not allowed to vote for various reasons that are ginned up by the local governments or the states or even the federal government to make things more difficult. I don't believe, and many others do not believe, that, for instance, that George W. Bush was ever elected to office, to federal office. He was never elected either time he ran for president, but both times he had the power of the establishment behind him. They wanted him in control, and he got the power that he wanted. He was a willing participant. He did what he was told. He was given the talking points, and more the American presidents do conduct business listening to these advisors who are not elected, but who really run the show behind the scenes. And this is the way it's been for a very long time. And it's getting to be that way more and more as time goes on. We have the well-established Brent Scowcroft on the right and Zbigniew Brzezinski on the left as advisors to presidents. And we have them getting together and sort of comparing notes. They wrote a book about it together. interviewing, both of them were interviewed. And the beginning of the book, Brzezinski and Scowcroft admit that in reality their goals are the same. They are very similar in their views, and yet they're advising presidents from different camps. And by the end of the book, they also agree that their ultimate goal is reduced American sovereignty. So in other words, sovereignty means that the country is not in charge of itself. When you have personal sovereignty, you are the boss of your own body. If you lose personal sovereignty, you are not the boss of your own life. Someone else is calling the shots. And that's why we have the Bill of Rights. It's so important, and why so many people want to come to this country, because many other countries do not have those very specific rights that are not given to us, the citizens of this country, as, okay, we're going to give you these rights, or we're going to give you a license to be able to do this, which we can revoke at any time. No, those rights, you were born with those rights. This is what's unique about the U.S. Constitution, and one of the main reasons why, as well as being very popular among the peoples of the world who want to live under that very important document, but also why the document, the rules of citizenship, so to speak, the rules of America, the playbook that Americans live by, or are supposed to, that's also why that document is now the oldest constitution on the planet. And it's been that way for a while. This makes it especially precious and especially unique. It has been officially the most important document in the United States for longer than any other country has had their constitution in existence. So although we are a very young country in terms of years, in terms of continuity of government or continuity of the same rules of the game, then that makes it the oldest technically, you could say. I wish that our leadership and Americans in general behaved in a way that would be commensurate with the age of the document that runs the show in America, the go-to document. That's the reset document. That's the basic underlying foundation of the country. I mean, I do think that a lot of Americans do have a sophisticated view of the world. They have an understanding that you are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, that is amazing. Literally a lot of countries do not have that. Americans have that. Not all Americans have that, but a lot of Americans have that. And I think it's important that more and more Americans have that and understand how rare and precious that is. So we also have a sense that we have certain basic, freedoms, and these are under attack, and they've always been under attack. Since the beginning of this country, there have been powerful forces who do not believe that the common person is intelligent enough, is mature enough, to make their own decisions about how their life goes. And I can understand how they, make these judgments. They see themselves, oh, look at me. I really have my life together. I'm rich. I'm famous. I'm sensible. I'm educated. And look at these people. They're not rich. They're not famous. They're not educated. They're not sensible. They're running around doing all kinds of self-destructive behaviors. They need a strong parental guidance. They need a strong hand. And of course, this is a recipe for tyranny or fascism. Even in the most benevolent form, it is nevertheless risky to do that because people have a tendency, when they get control, to want to enforce their will. And so they need enforcers to enforce their will, to make sure that people don't upset the apple cart. And there are going to be people out there who are going to upset the apple cart for any number of reasons. They simply don't agree with you. They have their own idea. They think it should be their way instead of your way. But you believe that your way is better, and so you have to take whatever steps are necessary. When we see the death of the Supreme Court Justice, this could be, very possibly, a huge turnaround in which certain elements of this country will benefit. Now, maybe not. Now, in other times, Democrats, liberals have placed Supreme Court justices in power, and they expected them to respond a certain way, to further the agenda of the person who appointed them out of gratitude, because their views dovetail. But I've also read that once you get that appointment to the Supreme Court, there's something inside of you that changes. It's as if a new outlook, a new view of the world sort of settles down over you. When you put those black robes on, and you know that you cannot be fired from that position. You could retire from the position, but other than death, if you do not want to retire, you will stay there. You will be there. And so this gives you a sense of freedom, a sense of, you know what? I can do the right thing. What is the right thing? What is the right thing? And then you start thinking about what is the right thing to do. What does the Constitution say? Is the Constitution a malleable, living, breathing document that has to change with the times? Or were the founders so visionary that they were able to see the course of the United States through its entire lifespan, hundreds of years into the future, that the wording that they poured over, that they changed, that they crafted so carefully, does it resonate through the centuries enough to be more or less taken without major interpretation? My understanding is that Anton Scalia was one of those guys. He came up with this term, originalism. And he believed that it was important to try to stay with the vision of the founders as much as possible. And is that the best course? Well, again, yes and no. I'm not an expert on constitutional law. But it's one of those questions that you have to weigh, and you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. Do give this particular issue a broad interpretation constitutionally, or do we try to stick very close to the original? And one thing we can say is that opinions have changed. At one point, separate but equal to allow legal segregation was allowed by the Constitution. That was how it was interpreted. Well, that has since been overturned. So they do change their mind. And somebody like Ron Paul, I think, is probably the most sensible of all of the lawmakers who are looking at the Constitution. And he says very simple, basic things that are extremely easy to understand. Like, the Constitution says that you will not go to war without a declaration of war. That's very clear in the Constitution. But that has been parsed and spun to the point where you can have wars that are not really wars using this incredible twisted interpretation of the Constitution. And so Ron Paul has always said these wars are unconstitutional. You cannot just invade a country without a declaration of war. And there are other, of course, laws that have been put in place that are ignored by the U.S. government and other countries too. But because I'm a citizen of the United States, I'm most concerned about how the United States follows the law or does not follow the law, and very interested in intentions, declared intentions versus actual actions. In other words, we say one thing oftentimes and do something else. And this is not unusual. Countries do this. Leadership does this. And we always have to wonder what will be the consequences of this behavior down the road. Like, for instance, what does the law say about torture? Well, first you have to define what torture is. Now, the U.S. Constitution has something to say about torture, as well as the United Nations, international law. This would be, in the U.S. Constitution, a violation of civil rights. And it's outright banned in international law. So the only wiggle room you have is to define torture. Oh, it's not torture. It's enhanced interrogation. But people who have common sense know that, these are just words to make it seem like it's legal. And torture as a definite, they try to define it as almost killing somebody, essentially. Or they are feeling like they're going to die. Well, I'm not sure if that's considered to be torture. Like waterboarding, that's where you feel like you're going to die. You feel like you're going to be drowning. You feel like you are drowning and you're going to be dead. But really, more to the point is, does torture work? Is torture a useful tool? And it turns out, no, torture is not a useful tool. Why is it not a useful tool? It is a useful tool if you are wanting someone to confess to whatever you want them to confess to. Then it's very useful. You can get them to confess to anything. Anything with torture. But it is not useful in getting to the truth. But if you are a criminal, if you are, let's say, running an illegal activity and you want to frame someone and put them in prison or have them executed as the perpetrator, and you capture them and you torture them and you get a confession that they confessed that they did the crime that you yourself actually did, then torture is extremely useful. Or if you have, like, law enforcement. Law enforcement is faced with a crime that they do not have the perpetrator. They don't know who did the crime. Or maybe they did, but they're just trying to cover it up. So they find someone else, and they get them to confess, and then put them in jail, and problem solved. And maybe they don't like this person anyway, or they feel like this person's not a good person, and maybe they're a criminal anyway, so they deserve it. And Trump, you know, here's one of the failings of Trump. I think Trump has got a lot of understanding on a lot of subjects, but he did say that, oh yes, I would waterboard and I would do a whole lot more. Now, was he just, for one thing, he's not allowed to do that. Maybe he's just trying to be a tough guy, to appear tough before his supporters. Because a lot of people do think, particularly I think Republicans, they think that we have to torture for our security, to keep us safe. It's essential. They've watched the TV show 24, and they saw on 24 that, oh my gosh, torture really does work. Wow. This guy, this police officer, tortured him, and he found out where the bomb was going to go off. So that proves it, that we need it. Or maybe it was subconscious. You know, they didn't, they knew consciously it's just a TV show, but subconsciously it went in there, and yeah, that really works. But again, it's all about education. It's all about looking at people's opinions that you trust. People who have been proven right over and over and over should be listened to. People who have been proven wrong over and over should not be listened to. So it's a bit of a track record. That's helpful in making a decision about who to listen to. Because almost everything that we know vicariously. We've read it in an article. We read a book. We read a newspaper. We saw it on television. We heard it on the radio. Or we heard it from a friend of ours, or maybe we heard it from someone who actually, you know, was actually there, you know, firsthand, or we saw it ourselves. We had firsthand experience. That is, of course, the best way. But most of us can't live our lives and actually see things happen in front of our eyes. Although, in this modern world, it is possible to create an illusion that people see with their own eyes, and they believe that what they're looking at is something other than what actually happened. This is what happened on 9/11. People were staring right there. They were looking right at the Twin Towers as they fell, and did not see that they were being actually exploded with enormous amounts of high-powered explosives from top to bottom, both of them. Because, and why did they didn't know what they were seeing. They didn't have the experience and the know-how and the knowledge and the understanding and the awareness to understand that what they were seeing was not a pancake collapse, which is the actual official explanation of what happened to the Twin Towers, but a controlled demolition and explosions from floor to floor, boom, 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 all computer controlled in a perfect collapse over 100 stories, total, absolute collapse, explosion, more than just a collapse, exploding, disintegration, a disintegration. I shouldn't even use the word collapse. It's a disintegration. And the enormous clouds that were released covering all of Lower Manhattan, and even sweeping out in enormous clouds across the East River, in giant billowing clouds, 50 stories tall. And they have the video of this. And so that the streets, the sidewalks, the cars, the people were covered with a dust that was sometimes 6 inches, a foot thick of dust. And what was that dust? The dust was the World Trade Center itself. The concrete was atomized. Atomized. Most of the concrete in both the World Trade Center towers was atomized, and only enormous explosive power could do that. The steel columns were cut with thermite at an angle, and months afterwards they were lying in a pile as the big crane with the shovel and the grippers and the talons pull them up to be sent away to China without any investigation. But you could see that some of them were still hot. They were still burning in those cuts, and those diagonal cuts. You could see them. I mean, this is proof positive of high-tech destruction, not caused by office fires, not caused by an airplane hitting the building, in which the fuel, the jet fuel, which is kerosene, exploding instantly, all of it, boom, and enormous orange explosions where they hit. That's the fuel. We've all seen over and over and over the footage. But unless you know what you're seeing, you will believe the government. But once you understand, you will never believe the government. You can't, because what you're seeing could only have happened one way, and that is by controlled demolition in some manner. And as Sherlock Holmes, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, wrote, once the impossible has been removed, once has proven, once it's removed from the equation, this is a paraphrase, then whatever is left, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. And yes, you could say, but how could they have done that? How could those 19 terrorists have wired up both of the Twin Towers? I mean, that would take weeks, wouldn't it? Months? How long? Who knows? A long time. And somebody has to control it, and somebody has to push the button to make it all happen. It's a very high tech. It takes only a few companies in the world are capable of doing the kind of destruction to those buildings that we saw on 9/11. How could those 19 terrorists who could barely fly a little Cessna have done that, have had the expertise to do that? How could Osama bin Laden, hiding in a cave in Afghanistan with a laptop and his dialysis machine to keep him alive, how could he have done that? Well, he didn't. Okay? He didn't. The 19 hijackers, that's just a number that was falsified and faces just thrown in there from all these different individuals. Many of them are still alive, or maybe most of them, I don't know, or all of them, who knows? They're just faces were not even completely with the right name. They were just thrown in there. Yet they're set in concrete for all time in the mainstream history, and that's the history that's written. And as you and I know, history is always 100% true. That's sarcasm. But it's history. It must be true. It's the truth. Look at all these history books it's written in. It's taught in college classes. It's taught to grade school kids. It's taught to high school kids. It must be true. Or is it? Maybe there's a whole different reality that's the actual reality. There's an overlay of false reality put over the real reality that will give us a perception of the way that the world works that is so different from the way it actually works. And we make our decisions, important decisions in our lives, based on this manufactured reality that is being created for us every day, every single day of our lives. From the day that we're born, we're living under a certain level of control. Of course, George Orwell warned us about this in 1984, very specifically. Now, his main character, Winston Smith in Big Brother, Winston Smith worked for Big Brother to destroy the truth, change the truth. Every day, change the truth. Make what was true one day, false the next day. Or, just to whatever the political agenda was, then that was his job. All day long, he changed reality. So he didn't have the technology that we have now. We have the technology now to do that so much more easily. As we go more and more digital, and truth, history, becomes digitalized, and it all comes under the control, it's harmonized. All of the various history books are harmonized, and they go digital. And if, as time goes on, the print copy disappears more and more and more, it'll become a relic in a museum. And even then, that will vanish, and it will all be digital. Then, how easy it is to change once everything is hooked together, change history to change reality. And that would be a way to control people. I truly believe that people are so unhappy and they turn to drugs and alcohol and other antisocial criminal behaviors because they are frustrated. They're upset. They don't even know why. Something is not right in the world. Something doesn't make any sense in the world. They don't know what it is. And they just want to escape because it's so painful to live life in this sense of deep wonderment and perplexity and puzzlement. They're befuddled. They're befuddled, and they just go, just I give up. Screw it. I give up. Give me a quick fix. Give me a feel-good feeling. They just want to feel good. People just want to feel good in their lives. They want to be happy. They want contentment. They want a feeling of fulfillment. And cocaine gives that a temporary feeling of that, of feeling so good, you might say. This is what I've heard, anyway, about this drug and other drugs. And they all work pretty much the same way. Even the antidepressants sort of hook into the same receptors in the brain that cocaine and heroin and opiates do. And so we have this sense, these people we just want to get away from it. It's just too much too difficult. So what do we do? But it's all about education. It's all about looking at options, feeling your heart. You know, what direction does your heart lead you? What does that inner friend tell you? We all have an inner friend. We all have a voice inside of us that never lies to us. Not our brain that's going on and on and on like a squirrel on a cage or something, running around. We've got the squirrel upstairs running around in circles. We also have a very practical voice inside that tells us what to do, what not to do, and tells us right, and allows us to be the sensible people that we are in reality, and who can truly enjoy the experience of being alive, regardless of our circumstances, whether we're rich, poor, employed, unemployed. It's a feeling of being alive and enjoying being alive. That's really why we're here. All the rest really doesn't make that much difference. We have to have our basic needs met. That is absolutely true. We need to have a reasonably good shelter, good food, good air, clean water. We need security in our lives, and yes, we need that. But the number one thing we need is that sense of that security in ourselves, that we know who we are, we can enjoy who we are, we can enjoy being alive. So that's all there is for today. Have a great weekend and sleep well.